Hello, my name is Barry Thomson. I'm an architectural historian, author, and lecturer. Welcome to my presentation about the grotesques of architect George B. Post here at the College of the City of New York and at Claremont, Post's own home in Bernardsville, New Jersey. During the Middle and Late Middle Ages, in the heyday of Gothic architecture, the bizarre, scary, carved figures known as gargoyles, seen here, and grotesques, were thought to protect churches and cathedrals from evil and to ward off Satan and other demons. In later centuries, these sorts of absurdist creatures came to be used as decorative devices on many secular as well as sacred buildings, and on architectural styles far removed from the Gothic. Today you will find grotesques on everything from office buildings, such as New York's Woolworth Building, to city halls and theaters, even on firehouses, and apartment buildings. For example, these outside railings on the famous Dakota apartments in New York that were designed in 1884 by Bernardsville's own Henry Hardenberg. I have long been fascinated by the strange, humorous, and sometimes nightmarish grotesques and gargoyles that one sees in architecture. In this presentation, I will focus on the prominent architect and Bernardsville resident, George B. Post, and the incorporation of some 600 grotesques in his early 20th century design for the new campus of the College of the City of New York. As we will see, some of the small plaster models, known as maquettes, of post-City College grotesques came to be installed in the library at Claremont. The Bernardsville house Post was designing and building at the same time as the City College campus. The Post family first came to Bernardsville in 1870, buying up several large tracts of land and establishing a country estate they called Claremont Farm. The name was taken from the large estate of some 70 acres overlooking the Hudson River in Upper Manhattan that George's grandfather, Joel Post, had acquired in 1821. The Post family's Claremont house in New York was originally built by the well-to-do Irish linen merchant George Pollock in the 1790s on property he called Strawberry Hill. The 1797 grave of Pollock's 4-year-old son, St. Clair Pollock, who is better known in New York City history by the inscription on his headstone as the Amiable Child, stands nearby on the steep hillside overlooking the Hudson. Michael Hogan acquired the property around 1807 and renamed the house and property Claremont, most likely for his home county of Clare in Ireland. This interesting map shows the early 19th century farm tracts in Upper Manhattan, with an overlay showing the 1811 street grid from 115th Street up to 135th Street, with the Hudson River off to the left. The site of Michael Hogan's Claremont house on his 73-acre estate is identified by the blue star. Before selling the property to Joel Post in 1821, Hogan leased the house to several notable people, including one of Aaron Burr's daughters, to the Earl of Devon, and to Joseph Bonaparte, the ex-king of Spain and brother of Napoleon. In 1873, New York City acquired much of the Post family estate under eminent domain to form part of Riverside Park. The remaining land was sold off in the form of building lots. The Post mansion was soon altered and enlarged to become a popular high-end roadhouse known for years as the Claremont Inn. It burned down in 1951, and a playground now occupies the site. President Ulysses S. Grant's enormous mausoleum, completed in 1897, was located just to the south along what became Riverside Drive, on land that had been part of the Post family's Claremont estate. George Brown Post was born in 1837, the year Queen Victoria acceded to the British throne. Post was born into an old, established, affluent, and socially prominent New York family. Evidencing an interest in architecture even as a young boy, as seen here in one of his drawings made when he was 8, Post was one of the first to study in the new School of Civil Engineering and Architecture at what is now New York University. Earning his bachelor's degree in 1858, Post declined a teaching post in mathematics at the university. Rather, he decided to pursue his studies in architecture in the atelier of the eminent Richard Morris Hunt in the famous 10th Street studio building in New York's Greenwich Village. Hunt, who had been the first American architect to be trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, would remain a mentor and supporter of Post over the ensuing years. George Post was among the most prominent and influential of the country's post-Civil War architects. He was a prolific designer in most building types, including commercial, civic, residential, governmental, religious, and educational structures, as well as everything from large exposition spaces to cemetery monuments. Even urban planning projects during the City Beautiful movement of the 1890s and early 1900s. Post was invited to enter more than 50 design competitions, including that for the College of the City of New York, and in his career he had more than 400 completed design projects. Among his most recognizable buildings today are the iconic New York Stock Exchange and what would be his last project, the Wisconsin State Capitol. Post and his sons also designed several dozen projects, principally residences, in the Somerset Hills. George Post is also an important figure in architectural history for the significant advances he made in the technology and art of the skyscraper. Because his Equitable Life building in New York, completed in 1870, was the first office building to utilize elevators, it is recognized today by many as being the first true skyscraper. Moreover, Post's engineering skill in the use of iron framing significantly expanded the boundaries of what we now call skeleton frame skyscraper construction. Due to his engineering skill, several of Post's commercial buildings were, at the times of their completion, ranked as the tallest office buildings in the world. Post was also historically significant for establishing what many consider to have been the first large, truly modern architectural office. His office was able to tackle increasingly complex design projects in a timely manner where time was money. This was in contrast to the previous atelier or design studio model, in which architects tended to work alone or with just a handful of draftsmen. In 1904, Post renamed his firm George B. Post and Sons in recognition that 2 of his 5 children had joined him in his increasingly busy architectural practice. One of his sons, William Stone Post, worked with his father on the City College project. In his lifetime, Post received many awards and accolades and the respect of his peers, who referred to him as the Dean of our American architects. In 1911, 2 years before his death, the American Institute of Architects, of which Post had served as president in the 1890s, awarded him its gold medal, which was presented by President William Howard Taft. To tell the story of the new campus for the College of the City of New York, we need to go back to 1847, when a group of wealthy businessmen organized the Free Academy of the City of New York. The Free Academy was established to provide children of immigrants and the poor access to free higher education based on academic merit alone. The school's original building, completed in 1849 at the corner of 23rd Street and Lexington Avenue, was designed in the neo-Gothic style by James Renwick, Jr. Renwick is most famous for his design of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York and the original castle building of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. The Free Academy was renamed the College of the City of New York in 1866. To date, 10 Nobel Prizes have been awarded in such disciplines as physiology, physics, economics, and chemistry to people affiliated with City College. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who began his academic career at City College, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973 for his efforts to negotiate an end to the war in Vietnam. As the 20th century approached, City College had outgrown its old building at 23rd Street, so the trustees announced a design competition for a new campus on a 9-acre tract of then rural land on the St. Nicholas Heights in Upper Manhattan. The land, which was located between Amsterdam Avenue on the west and St. Nicholas Terrace on the east, and between 138th and 140th Streets, offered commanding and unobstructed views overlooking both the Hudson and Harlem rivers. The campus today occupies some 36 acres. City College followed the pattern set by both Columbia University and New York University in the 1890s, moving northward from their congested sites further downtown to more campus-like open spaces. In the case of Columbia and City College, that meant the Upper West Side of Manhattan. For New York University, it meant a campus across the Harlem River in the Bronx. In short, all three schools followed the long-established development and mass transit pattern of the city itself. In December 1897, George Post won the design competition for the new college campus, beating out other prominent firms such as McKim, Mead & White that had only recently designed the new Columbia campus just 1 mile to the south. Due to legal and financial problems, construction of City College did not begin until 1903. It was completed 4 years later in 1907. In 1899, 2 years after winning the City College commission, Post won the competition to design the New York Stock Exchange building. In contrast to City College, however, the Stock Exchange was completed in 1903 just as construction was beginning on the college. The contrast in the architectural styles of the two projects gives some idea of the range of Post's design talent. In the design competition for City College, Post proposed 2 different plans, one in the neoclassical Beaux-Arts style, which he was said personally to favor, and one in the Collegiate Gothic style, which the trustees preferred and ultimately selected. Collegiate Gothic was then in vogue for American college campuses, and perhaps the trustees preferred it because it was somewhat evocative of the school's original 23rd Street building. Also, the verticality of Gothic offered a picturesque potential for the elevated site on St. Nicholas Terrace. In addition, perhaps the choice of Gothic was intended to be a clear contrast to the Beaux-Arts classical style of McKim, Mead & White's Columbia campus that was within visible range to the south, and Stanford White's Pantheon-like library for New York University's uptown campus across the Harlem River in the Bronx. These section drawings show George Post's original design proposals for City College. At the top is the neoclassical proposal, and below is the Collegiate Gothic style that the trustees selected. To hold down construction costs, Post turned the challenge of building on bedrock to the college's advantage. Due to the extensive blasting and excavating that were required to construct the buildings on the outcropping of rock known as Manhattan schist, Post used the excavated stone to face the buildings. To add subtle interest, some blocks of stone were intentionally selected for use due to the reddish-brown color of their iron content, while virtually all of the stone evidenced shiny, reflective bits of mica. Off-white glazed terracotta was used to provide a dramatic contrast to the dark gray stone. The terracotta was light, could easily be molded for the building's trim and elaborate decorative elements, and was, at the time, thought to be durable. Over time, however, the strength of the terracotta turned out to be a significant problem. As many of the stone facades of the buildings were bearing walls and not an applique over a steel frame, the terracotta had to endure significant downward pressure. Over time, the terracotta began to fail, resulting in a very expensive restoration program begun in the 1990s. Much of the terracotta had to be replaced with a newly developed cast cement product reinforced with fiberglass. The same product had also been used in the restoration of the terracotta sheathing of Cass Gilbert's 1913 masterpiece, the Woolworth Building in downtown New York. Much of the restoration expense at City College was due to the need to remodel many of the damaged grotesques. Post's 5 buildings at City College formed something of a quadrangle divided by Convent Avenue. The 2 curved wings of the largest building, Shepherd Hall, followed the curve of St. Nicholas Terrace, with the Great Hall, the grandest space in that building, sitting perpendicular to the chord of the arc. To the east of St. Nicholas Terrace was the relatively steep cliff of St. Nicholas Park overlooking Harlem. The Mechanical Arts Building, seen at the far right in this rendering and in this recent photograph, was a particularly eye-catching structure. Post intentionally gave it a factory-like appearance to express its functions, which included housing the campus power plant. Rather than try to disguise the building's tall chimney, Post boldly placed it front and center and made an ornamental feature of it, replete with gargoyles at the top. Some critics at the time the campus was built took issue with the stark contrast between the dark gray of the Manhattan schist and the off-white terracotta, although later observers have generally warmed to the look. An unsigned review published in the Architectural Record in 1907, while lauding the, quote, delightful and inspiring, end quote, architecture, was critical of the color contrast, calling it, quote, violent and disturbing, end quote. Another early commentator, Montgomery Schuyler, also admired the architecture but disliked the contrast of materials and color. With respect to the architecture, Schuyler compared the City College buildings to what he called, quote, the cloistrality and the charm of the originals, end quote, his reference being to the towers of Magdalen, Merton, and St. John's colleges at Oxford and Cambridge in England. Schuyler's comparison to Oxford and Cambridge has to be taken with a grain of salt. Despite the fact that City College shared a Gothic architectural vocabulary and an academic purpose with the English colleges, the difference between the dark gray stone of City College and the warm golden yellow limestone of Oxford is too striking to ignore. I should also note that it was somewhat ironic that the trustees of the more democratic City College of New York, which was established to be a school of higher education for the children of immigrants and the city's poor, should choose an architectural style evocative of the most elite and historically undemocratic colleges of England. Today, the City College campus overlooks St. Nicholas Park and the Hamilton Grange. Built some 100 years before City College, the Grange was the only house known to have been built and owned by Alexander Hamilton. Although the house was relocated to its present site in St. Nicholas Park in 2008, it still sits within the boundaries of Hamilton's original 32-acre estate. As we enter the City College campus, here are two images showing one of the gateways. The second image, in color, shows the extensive cleaning and restoration work that has been carried out on the campus in recent decades. The City College campus today is well worth a visit. The following images show various views of the original 5-building campus designed by Post, as well as examples of the restored terracotta work. This is a section and elevation drawing of Shepherd Hall. The drawing evokes the building's almost cathedral-like shape and appearance, especially the towers and the large windows of the building's Great Hall. With seating accommodating more than 2,000 people, the Great Hall is the grandest interior space on campus. Heavy buttresses, traceried windows, twin towers containing organ lofts, and a Gothic beamed ceiling all simulate English great halls of the late Tudor period. This is a view toward the rear, galleried end of the room. The next image shows the front, stage end of the Great Hall as it appeared in 1910. The mural at the back of the stage, seen here, was painted by Edwin Howland Blashfield around 1907. The large oil-on-canvas mural measures 22 feet high at the center and 43 feet wide. Called The Graduate, the work includes allegorical as well as distinguished historical figures. Post was known throughout his career for prominently utilizing and actively promoting the talents of many artists in his architectural projects. These included sculptors such as Carl Bitter and John Quincy Adams Ward, and painters such as Francis de Millet, J. Alden Weir, Kenyon Cox, and Edwin Blashfield. So how do we distinguish between gargoyles and grotesques? Essentially, gargoyles are decorative waterspouts that preserve stonework by diverting the flow of rainwater away from a building. The term is said to have originated from the French word gargouille, having to do with the throat. The word is said to have come from the legend of Saint Romanus of Rouen, France, who tamed the dragon, Gargouille, that spewed water from its mouth. The use of what we now call gargoyles to project rainwater away from a building dates back, however, to ancient Egypt, and in Greece at least back to the 5th century BC, when lion-head waterspouts were incorporated in the Parthenon in Athens. The term grotesque, on the other hand, is from the Italian word groteschi, or grottos, a reference to decorations found during the excavation of ancient Roman houses in the late 15th century. Grotesques can take any fanciful human or animal form, especially when they indulge in caricature, ugliness, or absurdity. They can serve practical purposes, such as corbels or capitals, or purely ornamental functions. Gargoyles and grotesques have also, not surprisingly, been widely seen in popular culture. One notable example, of course, is the 1831 Victor Hugo novel Notre Dame de Paris. Although turned into several film versions over the years as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the original book title gives no doubt that Hugo's intent, through his fictional story, was to focus on the cathedral itself and on the importance of Gothic architecture in French history and culture. In the book, which is set in the 15th century, the sympathetic protagonist, the hunchbacked Quasimodo, appears almost as a living version of one of the cathedral's scary, deformed grotesques. Hugo's book was primarily a lament about the sorry condition of Notre Dame and an effort to make his 19th century contemporaries aware of the need to preserve and protect these Gothic structures and their numerous gargoyles and grotesques. In that, he succeeded, because a major restoration project at Notre Dame began a few years after the publication of his book. A more recent example of gargoyles and grotesques in popular culture is the coffee table book Nightmares in the Sky, with text by Stephen King, the master of horror novels, and photographs by the cleverly named F. Stop Fitzgerald. In the book, King wrote that, quote, "As I leafed through a selection of the photos which make up this book, staring into stone faces that alternately grinned and leered, sobbed and smirked, snarled and cringed, I felt a sense of horror that was not precisely physical nor precisely mental. It seemed to hold itself balanced on the tips of those nerve endings, refusing to become either revulsion or terror. Looking at those pictures was like having a nightmare awake. Look closely, because we see these ominous lares of the human psyche so seldom. They are there, these nightmares, but they are in the sky. Look closely, because even when you don't see them, they are watching you." End quote. With respect to the grotesques that adorn the City College buildings, Arthur Ebbs Willauer, a draftsman in George Post's architectural firm, wrote a 2-part article about City College that appeared in the American Architect and Building News in May 1908. Willauer noted that, quote, "The ornamental details of the buildings were very carefully studied and well executed, and the great variety of these details occupied months of study and thought. The underlying idea is that each principal ornamental detail, besides serving as a decorative spot, shall mean something. On the academic building, these figures suggest the beginnings of higher education, but those on the main building represent the more advanced studies and professions. Those on the chemical building are industriously engaged in mysterious experimentation. The quaint little mechanics on the Mechanic Arts building are busy with their tools, while the little men on the gymnasium appear in all sorts of quaint and ludicrous contortions." End quote. Post's initial conceptual drawings were then handed over to Livingston Smith, an architect in the firm who refined the images by creating detailed measured drawings. Smith, who was from Philadelphia and a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, had first worked for Carrere and Hastings in New York before joining the Post firm. In 1907, at the conclusion of the City College project, Smith returned to Philadelphia, where he worked for Horace Trumbauer before forming his own practice. To fabricate the extensive terracotta for City College, Post turned to the Perth Amboy Terracotta Company in New Jersey. It is significant to point out that the terracotta work alone represented 20% of the total cost of the City College project. George Post has been credited with being the first architect in New York to use terracotta as a purely decorative element on buildings. In 1878, he first used terracotta in that way on two buildings: the Manhattan residence of the Danish Consul General to New York, Henri M. Brame, and on the Long Island Historical Society building, now the Brooklyn Historical Society, in Brooklyn Heights. After Livingston Smith executed detailed drawings based on Post's initial concept sketches, Jeremiah Grandellis, an Italian-born artist, sculpted or modeled the figures, first in small 5-inch by 5-inch plaster of Paris maquettes. The figures were then refined and scaled up so that the Perth Amboy firm could cast the full-scale terracotta grotesques to be installed on the buildings. Grandellis, who was born in the Veneto region of northeastern Italy, studied sculpture in Venice, first exhibiting his work at the first Venice Biennale in the mid-1890s. He came to the United States around that time and became a naturalized American citizen in 1902. This is an image of Grandellis' sculpture studio. Grandellis' range of work included interior sculptures and bronze doors for the National Cathedral in Washington, and a bust of the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VIII and the Duke of Windsor, sculpted in 1919 for the Canadian Parliament building in Ottawa. The photo on the right shows Grandellis standing on a stool next to the Prince of Wales sculpture. Grandellis also did work for several libraries, including the New York Public Library, for which he sculpted figures for the bases of the elaborate Tiffany-cast bronze flagpoles, as seen here on the left. His private sculptural commissions included works for members of the Astor, Gould, Vanderbilt, Roosevelt, and other prominent families. Grandellis also created a large sculptural grouping, seen here, for what he called the Palazzo di Giustizia in Washington. This is believed to have been intended for the new Department of Justice building for which Post won the design competition in 1900. The building was never constructed, however, due to insufficient government appropriations. Sadly, in 1905, Grandellis' son, Bruno, died at the age of 4. His father sculpted this elaborate terracotta grave marker that was placed in the Hillside Cemetery in Metuchen, New Jersey, where it stands today, although decaying. On the back, it reads, Tuo padre fece A.D. 1905. Your father made this. George Post not only conceptualized all of the grotesques that came to decorate the City College buildings, but he was a hands-on manager overseeing every aspect of the project. Here we see him at the Perth Amboy Terracotta Company inspecting the modeling of lions for one of the buildings. Lions were a design motif Post used throughout his career, from the lion sculptures that guard the forecourt of Claremont in Bernardsville to the official stamp of the Post architectural firm. Sculpted lions were also used by Post in his 1890 Prudential Insurance Company headquarters in Newark. Fortunately, some of those lions have survived, even if the Prudential building has not. Because the lion is the symbol of Columbia University's athletic teams, years ago an officer of the university salvaged the Prudential lions from the back of a dump truck as the old building in Newark was being demolished. Today, those Prudential lions, holding their shields before them, sit outside one of Columbia University's buildings. As noted at the beginning of this presentation, George Post decided to incorporate some of the small plaster of Paris maquettes of his City College grotesques in the library at Claremont in Bernardsville. The maquettes, or models, were incorporated in the cornice around the four walls of the room, as can be seen in these archival and more recent images. Based on drawings found in the Post firm's archives at the New York Historical Society, it appears Post decided to add the grotesques to the library at some point during the planning stage. These two drawings would seem to indicate that the change was made sometime between August 1904 and June 1905. In 2012, following the death of Marnie Stein, the last Post family descendant to own and occupy Claremont, the contents of the mansion were auctioned off. In preparing for the auction, a box containing 14 extra plaster maquettes of the City College grotesques was found in the Claremont attic. I was pleased to have been able to acquire the collection and lend them for a retrospective exhibit about Post that was held at City College in 2014. I'm also pleased to be able to show them to you now at the end of this presentation. I encourage you to visit the City College campus, to enjoy firsthand the restored buildings and see how many of the 600 grotesques you can find and identify. Thank you for watching.